You got the promotion, and instead of popping a bottle, your first instinct was to pull out your phone and start writing a text explaining why you actually deserved it. Think about that for a second. The win arrived, and your immediate response wasn't celebration, it was defense. You wanted someone, anyone, to pre-approve what had already happened. And it's not just promotions. You canceled plans last week, didn't you? And you spent almost an hour composing an apology message so detailed, so thorough, that the person on the other end probably needed 3 minutes just to read it. You made a choice about your time, your health, your money, your life. And you felt this buzzing, almost physical urgency to explain it before anyone even asked. Here is what almost nobody talks about. That buzzing feeling, that compulsive need to narrate your own decisions. It is costing you far more than you realize. It is leaking your confidence, eroding your authority, and in some cases, quietly dismantling your sense of self. Today, Stoic Zeno is walking you through 10 lessons, 10 clear, actionable, philosophy-backed lessons on why you need to stop justifying your life to people who never requested a justification in the first place. And I want you to stay with me for lesson 1, because it reframes every single lesson that follows. By the time we reach lesson 10, something is going to loosen inside you, something you have been carrying for years. If you are new here, this channel exists to help you build unshakable inner authority through the lens of Stoic philosophy. Subscribe and hit the notification bell, because we publish work like this every week. Let's begin. Write this down somewhere you'll actually see it. My choices, my life, no justification required. Lesson 1. The contract you never signed. When exactly did you agree to this arrangement? When did you sit down, pick up a pen, and officially consent to submitting all of your life choices for external review and approval? You didn't. No one did. Yet most of us walk through the world as though we did. As though somewhere in childhood there was a binding agreement signed on our behalf that says, every decision you make must first be acceptable to the people around you. Nobody handed you that contract. You wrote it yourself. Somewhere between learning to walk and learning to function as an adult. You absorbed a belief that your choices only become real once other people have nodded at them. Ask yourself where that came from. Maybe you grew up in a house where every decision you made was questioned. Maybe your judgment was routinely overruled, or your preferences were treated as inconveniences. Maybe your school system rewarded you not just for what you knew, but for how convincingly you could explain what you knew. And somewhere in that conditioning, explanation became survival armor. If I explain it perfectly, they won't push back. If I justify it completely, they won't reject me. If I can make them understand, I'll be safe. Here is what that pattern does over time. It programs you to seek outside validation before trusting your own inner wisdom. The external approval becomes the switch that activates your confidence, which means without it, the confidence never turns on. The Stoics had a name for the inner command center of the self. Marcus Aurelius called it the hegemonikon, the ruling faculty. Their entire philosophy was structured around protecting and strengthening that inner command center, never surrendering it to outside pressure. Read Marcus Aurelius. Slowly here. Command over your mind, not over external events. That is where your strength lives. Not command over what other people think of your decisions. Not command over how others receive your choices. Only over your own mind. Every time you over-explain, you are temporarily vacating that command center. You are walking out of your own fortress and handing the keys to someone who had no claim to them in the first place. When you stop explaining, when you genuinely accept that not everyone will understand your path and that this is completely acceptable, you walk back into that fortress and lock the door from the inside. Not because you're indifferent to people, not because you've become arrogant, but because your decisions belong to your life, and you are the only one who has to actually live inside that life. If this landed, drop in the comments. I decide. I move. No permission needed. Lesson 2. Over-explaining is a nervous system response, not a personality trait. This might be the most important thing I say in this entire video. Over-explaining is not a communication style. It is not what thoughtful, conscientious people do. It is not a sign of intelligence, despite what many of us quietly tell ourselves. In most cases, over-explaining is a nervous system response to perceived threat. And the threat it's responding to is the possibility of being judged, rejected, or misunderstood. Before you move on, stay with me for a moment, because when many people hear the word trauma, they picture dramatic, cinematic events. But the kind we are talking about here is quieter. It is any repeated experience that taught your system that simply existing, simply being, required constant justification. Growing up in a home where your feelings were consistently dismissed, you said, "I'm upset," and the response was, "You don't have a real reason to be upset." So you learned to prepare a fully documented case before you allowed yourself to feel anything. You learned that emotions without evidence were not permitted. Growing up with a parent or authority figure who scrutinized every choice, who communicated, clearly or subtly, that your judgment could not be trusted. So you began outsourcing your judgment to others before they could take it by force. Being in a relationship, romantic, professional, or otherwise, where your perspective was routinely treated as invalid. So you developed over-explanation as a preemptive shield. Most self-help content skips entirely over this route. They tell you to be more confident. They tell you to stop seeking approval. What they don't explain is why approval-seeking became necessary. And when you don't understand the origin of a pattern, the pattern doesn't stop. It just goes underground and shows up as something else. These old wounds don't announce themselves. They just run your life until you name them. Here is what over-explaining looks like when it is fully embedded in your daily behavior. Because it is sneakier than you think. You send a message and immediately send 2 more messages explaining the first one. You make a decision and preload your justification before anyone has questioned it. You say no and then spend the next 15 minutes narrating the no. You receive a compliment and immediately undercut it. "Oh, it was luck. I had so much help." It really wasn't that impressive. That last one. That is one of the most overlooked forms of the pattern. When someone tells you "well done," and you instantly list the reasons why you don't fully deserve the praise, you are not being humble. You are explaining away your own success to make other people comfortable with it. Epictetus, who was born into slavery and became one of history's most influential thinkers, offered this: "Do not demand that events unfold the way you wish. Embrace them as they are, and you will find peace." Apply that here. When you over-explain, you are trying to force reality into a shape where everyone approves of you. But reality does not negotiate. People will judge you, people will question you, people will misunderstand you. The Stoic answer is not to explain harder. The answer is to accept that judgment exists and to stop allowing the possibility of it to govern your behavior. Over the next 48 hours, notice every time you feel the urge to over-explain. Don't judge the urge. Just notice it. And then ask yourself one question. Am I explaining because this serves the conversation? Or am I explaining because I am afraid? That single question will begin to change things. Say this aloud, wherever you are right now. The old pattern ends here. I choose something different. Lesson 3. Too much explanation does the opposite of what you think. There is a principle in psychology called the over-justification effect, and it reveals something almost completely backward about human communication. When you provide too much justification for something, people actually trust it less, not more. Less. Think about the last time someone was trying very hard to convince you of something. A salesperson, a politician, a friend who clearly had an agenda underneath their words. They gave you 12 reasons. They piled on evidence. They seemed almost desperate for your agreement. What happened in your gut? You pulled back, because the human brain reads excessive justification as a signal. If they need to work this hard to convince me, something must be worth questioning. Imagine 2 people are asked why they left their previous job. The first person says, "Well, it was a lot of factors, really. The management style didn't match my values, and the communication could have been better." and I wasn't fully using my skills. And honestly, the commute was adding stress, and the team culture wasn't great, and I had been thinking about it for a while. The second person says, I had learned everything that role had to teach me. It was time. Who do you trust? Person B, every time. Every. Not because their answer is necessarily more honest. All of Person A's reasons might be completely true, but Person B communicates something Person A entirely fails to. Groundedness. A settled, unshifting sense of self. Every extra sentence you attach to a statement out of fear is a small, quiet act of self-betrayal. It says, I don't trust my own voice to hold enough weight on its own. Marcus Aurelius wrote, never place value on anything that will require you to break your integrity or lose your self-regard. And self-regard in communication looks like this. Trusting that your words carry meaning without needing to be buried under an avalanche of follow-up justification. The distinction is felt, not just understood. When you communicate from a place of inner security, you say, here is what I've decided, and here is why it matters to me. A. When you communicate from fear, you say, here is what I've decided, but please also accept these 16 reasons so you won't think less of me. Can you feel the difference? One is a person who has arrived. The other is a person still waiting for permission to arrive. Fewer words carry further when they're loaded with certainty. Screenshot that. Put it somewhere you'll see it before your next difficult conversation. Lesson 4. When someone always needs you to explain, the relationship has a problem. Here is something uncomfortable that most people never fully examine. Think about the last time you felt genuinely compelled to over-explain. Really sit with it. Who were you explaining yourself to? In most situations, it is not strangers. It is the people who are supposed to know you best. Your partner, a parent, a close friend. Someone who has theoretically signed up to be in your corner. And here is what that pattern reveals. The constant need to over-explain to someone who is supposed to love you unconditionally is almost always a symptom of something missing in that specific relationship. Real trust does not require constant documentation. Think about your most secure relationship, the person you would genuinely call in a crisis at 2 in the morning. Do you over-explain to them? Almost certainly not. You say, I need this, and they say, okay. There is an assumed foundation of goodwill that makes the briefing unnecessary. Now think about the relationships where you do over-explain. What is absent? In most cases, it is one of 3 things. A history of having your judgment dismissed or challenged. Conditional love, approval that feels like it depends on your performance rather than your presence. Or a power imbalance where the less powerful person feels they must continually justify their choices to the more powerful one. Seneca wrote, choose to spend time with those who will lift your character. Invite in those you can help grow. The exchange runs in both directions. We learn by teaching. The Stoics were intentional about who they gave access to their inner world, not because they were cold or exclusive, but because they understood that the people closest to you eventually become the internal voices you carry when you're alone. If the people in your life consistently demand explanation, over time you internalize that demand. You start cross-examining yourself before anyone else gets the chance. Here is a practice. Take your 5 closest relationships, and for each one, ask yourself a single, honest question. When I share a decision with this person, what do I instinctively expect from them? If your default expectation is acceptance, that relationship operates from trust. If your default expectation is scrutiny or judgment, there is a deficit worth addressing. This is not an instruction to cut people out of your life. It is an instruction to know which relationships demand emotional preparation and why. Because you can love someone genuinely and acknowledge that they do not make you feel fully safe. Both things can be true simultaneously. Write this down. Trust is earned. Proof is not the price of my worth. Lesson 5. Silence is not a gap. It's an instrument. Most people are deeply uncomfortable with silence. The moment a conversation pauses, the moment someone asks something and there is a beat of quiet, The impulse to fill it arrives immediately. And in that rush to fill it, people over-explain, they ramble, they say things they did not plan to say, they volunteer information nobody requested, all to escape 3 seconds of quiet air. But here is what silence actually does in human communication. Silence creates space, and space is where meaning lands. When you speak without pausing, you leave no room for your words to settle, no room for the other person to process what you have said, no room for the weight of it to register. But when you speak and then stop, your words carry more gravity, more presence, more authority. Picture a job interview. The interviewer asks, "Why should we choose you for this role?" Response: A. Well, I have a lot of experience in this area, and I'm a fast learner, and I work really well in teams, and I've produced good results before, and I'm genuinely passionate about this industry. Response B. 3 deliberate seconds of silence. Then, because I have done this exact job before, and I delivered measurable results doing it. Then silence again. Which person gets the role? Person B, not only because the content is stronger, but because of what the pause communicated before the first word was even spoken. I am not rattled. I am choosing my words deliberately. I do not need to fill every moment of this exchange with noise to prove I belong here. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If someone can demonstrate that my thinking or conduct is flawed, I will adjust it willingly." Truth serves everyone. That is a statement of intellectual security, of being so settled in your own values and reasoning that you do not need to perform certainty through speed or volume. The truly secure person can pause, can allow a question to hang in the air without immediately scrambling to answer it, because their sense of self does not depend on how quickly they fill the void. Here is the practice. Before you answer any high-stakes question, a difficult question from a partner, a challenge in a meeting, a provocative comment from someone trying to unsettle you, pause for 3 seconds. Not fidgety silence. Still, intentional silence. Look at the person. Take 1 slow breath, then speak. This does 3 things. It gives your mind time to choose the right words instead of defaulting to verbal panic. It signals groundedness rather than reactivity. And it prevents over-explanation because when you pause and choose deliberately, you say less. And when you say less, you say more. Next time someone applies pressure to make you respond immediately, remember this: my silence says more than their noise. Lesson 6. Stop defending. Here is what to do. Instead, you've lived this scene. You're in a disagreement. Someone says something critical. Maybe it's accurate, maybe it isn't, maybe it's somewhere in between, and before they have even finished their sentence, your mind is already in motion. Heart rate rising, thoughts racing, gathering evidence, preparing your rebuttal, building your case. By the time they stop speaking, you are not actually listening anymore. You are waiting for your turn to explain yourself. And the moment they stop, you release the defense. And this is called defensive reactivity. And it is one of the most quietly destructive patterns in human communication. Not because defending yourself is wrong, but because reactive defense, deployed the instant criticism arrives, communicates several things that all work against you. It communicates that you feel threatened. And when people see that they have rattled you, it often confirms to them that they have struck something real. It signals that you care more about being vindicated than about actually understanding what happened. And it transfers enormous power over your emotional state to the person doing the criticizing. So what do you do instead? When criticism or challenge arrives, you absorb it. You say, "That's worth thinking about. Walk me through what you mean," or "I hear you. Give me a moment with that," or simply, "Okay." Just okay. Not agreement, not submission, just reception. This feels completely counterintuitive, because every nerve in your body is signaling, defend, justify, explain. But here is what happens when you absorb instead of deflect. You completely disrupt the expected pattern of the conflict. The other person braced for resistance. When you don't provide it, the energy of the argument has nowhere to go. It dissolves. You also give yourself the chance to determine whether the criticism actually has merit. Because a great deal of the time, defensive reactivity prevents you from benefiting from feedback that is genuinely useful. Epictetus said, "If someone informs you that another person speaks poorly of you, do not rush to defend yourself. Instead, consider, if they knew me fully, they would have far more to criticize." Read that again. The Stoic response to criticism is not defense. It is perspective. It is the settled, unshakable awareness that your worth is not authored by someone else's opinion of you, and therefore their judgment carries no existential weight. You can examine it calmly, extract whatever is useful, release whatever isn't, without the whole exchange becoming a battle for your identity. That is real power, not the ability to win arguments, the ability to not need to. Before your next conflict, carry this with you. I don't defend. I don't collapse. I remain. Lesson 7. The framework that ends over-explanation permanently. You now understand why you over-explain. You understand the cost. But the practical question is this: how do you actually communicate differently? What do you say when you do need to explain something, but without drowning it in unnecessary narrative? Here is a simple three-part structure I call the CAP framework: claim, anchor, period. Most over-explanation happens because people bury the lead. They pile on context before ever stating the actual point, or they state the point, get anxious, and then immediately smother it under qualifications. The CAP framework reverses that. Claim. Start with your decision, your answer, your boundary. State it first. State it clearly. Instead of, "So I've been thinking about this for a while, and I've weighed a lot of factors, and after a lot of reflection, I think maybe I might want to potentially skip the event." Say, "I won't be at the event." Start there. Full stop. Anchor. If context genuinely adds something to the exchange, offer it. One reason, one sentence, perhaps two. Not a paragraph, not a defense. "I have a commitment that day." Done. Period. End the explanation. Do not add qualifiers after the anchor. Do not trail off into another round of justification. Do not apologize for having stated a position. Example: someone asks why you ended a relationship. Old approach. "It's complicated. There were some communication issues, and I think we wanted different things, and I still care about them, and it wasn't really either of our faults. It was more the timing and CAP approach. It wasn't the right fit for either of us. If pressed, we wanted different things. Period." Seneca wrote, "Hold fast to your instincts. They carry knowledge." That is precisely what the CAP framework protects: your first knowing, your original, unfiltered sense of what is true. Every layer of explanation you pile on top of that initial clarity buries it under the weight of other people's potential reactions. The CAP framework keeps your core knowing audible. And here is something that happens when you use this structure consistently over time. It rewires the relationship you have with your own decisions, because the act of asserting clearly, of placing your decision first before any explanation, trains your mind to lead from confidence rather than from fear. Eventually, you begin making better decisions because you know that when you make a call, you will be required to stand behind it cleanly. That forces you to choose things you actually believe in. Carry this into your next difficult conversation. I say it. I mean it. I stop. Lesson 8. There is a difference between explaining and communicating. Let me be absolutely precise about something here. Nothing in this video is an argument for becoming closed off. It is not a case for stonewalling your partner, dismissing your colleagues, or building a wall around your inner world that no one can access. Genuine, healthy communication is one of the most important capacities a human being can develop. The distinction we are making here is not between explain and don't explain. The distinction is between communication that flows from security and communication that flows from fear. There are specific contexts where explaining yourself is not just appropriate, it is essential. When your decision directly affects someone who has a legitimate stake in the outcome, They deserve a clear and honest account. Not because you owe them approval, but because they are genuinely impacted. When you have made a mistake in a professional context, a direct explanation of what happened and how you are correcting it is not weakness, it is integrity. When you are in a role of teaching or mentoring, thorough explanation is literally the job. When sharing your inner world deepens connection in a relationship you trust, when vulnerability serves intimacy, that sharing is not a failure of self-possession, it is closeness. And when you have genuinely caused someone pain and they need clarity, an honest explanation followed by accountability is not submission. It is character. Here is the filter to apply in any moment where you are asking yourself whether to explain. Is this explanation serving them? Serving the relationship? Serving something real and shared? Or is it serving my own need to feel insulated from judgment? If it is the former, communicate freely. With warmth, with detail, with presence. If it is the latter, that is the pattern we are unlearning. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Stop spending time arguing about what a good person should be one." The Stoics were not cold. They had deep friendships, fierce loyalties, profound love. What they refused was to let anxiety author their words. They spoke from virtue, from genuine care, genuine accountability, genuine connection, not from the need to manage what other people thought of them. That is the distinction. Not less communication, better communication. Communication that serves something real. Every word you choose from this point forward should pass this test. I speak by choice, not by fear. Lesson 9. Your identity does not belong to public opinion. Here is a question I want you to hold for a moment. Who are you when no one is watching? Not who you perform, not who you explain, not the version of you that exists in other people's assessments and interpretations. Who are you when it is just you? No audience, no observers, no one to convince. That person, the one who exists before the explanations begin, is who we are working to reconnect you with. There is a concept in psychology called the looking glass self. The idea that our self-image is shaped significantly by how we believe others perceive us. Over time, many of us begin to see ourselves primarily through the mirror of external opinion. We start making choices based on how they will appear to others. We explain ourselves endlessly because we have, gradually and without noticing, outsourced our identity to a collective opinion we cannot control. And what happens over time when you live that way? You lose yourself, not dramatically, gradually. Each time you over-explain, each time you trim your truth to fit someone else's comfort, each time you file away the authentic response in favor of the palatable one, a piece of who you actually are gets stored somewhere unexpressed, and eventually you wake up uncertain of what you actually want, what you actually think, who you actually are, apart from the version that has been approved by others. Epictetus taught, "Nothing that is truly yours can be taken from you. It can only be surrendered by you." Apply that here. Your identity does not live in other people's interpretations of you. It was never theirs to hold. Every time you over-explain to protect what you imagine they think of you, you are scrambling to guard something that was never in danger to begin with. Your real self cannot be damaged by someone's misunderstanding. It can only be abandoned by you. So begin making small daily decisions without narrating them. Order what you actually want without justifying it to the table. Leave when you are ready to leave without a 10-minute exit performance. Say no without a story attached to it. This is not rudeness. You are simply no longer staging your choices for an audience that never needed to see the performance. And what accumulates over time is this. You begin trusting yourself again. Underneath all the noise of imagined voices and pre-anticipated judgments, you find your own thoughts. Clear, present, yours. You find yourself still there. Why, still whole. If you have ever made yourself smaller to fit into someone else's comfort, I know who I am. That is enough. Lesson 10. The life that opens on the other side. Everything we have covered has been building to this. Stopping the over-explanation is not the destination. It is the door. What we are actually talking about is what becomes possible once you stop spending your energy on justifying, defending, and seeking approval. When you reclaim all of the mental and emotional bandwidth that was locked inside approval seeking. Here is where it goes. Your creative energy expands. Most people never fully recognize how much of their creative capacity is consumed by the need to be pre-approved. Every idea you censor before it has been fully formed. Every project you don't begin because you are already pre-imagining criticism. Every instinct you override because you cannot be certain it will be accepted. That is creative energy that never finds expression. When you stop explaining and start doing, unfiltered, undefended, you access a level of output that most people around you will never reach. Your relationships transform. When you stop performing acceptability for the people in your life, you become more genuine. And genuine people are magnetic in a way that performed people are not. The connections you build when you are operating from real confidence are deeper, more reciprocal, and more sustaining than anything constructed on the platform of approval. Your decisions improve dramatically. When other people's potential reactions are no longer factored into every choice you make, you can hear yourself clearly. You begin making choices that align with your actual values, your actual goals, your actual nature. And decisions made from that place of authentic clarity tend to be genuinely good ones. And most importantly, you develop what can only be called dignity, not pride. Pride is relational. It requires a comparison, a ranking, a sense of being above. Dignity is internal. It is the quiet, solid experience of being whole within yourself, of not needing external validation to feel real, valid, and worthy. When you stop making your worth contingent on whether people understand and agree with your choices, you develop something that cannot be taken, not by criticism, not by misunderstanding, not by someone's bad opinion of you. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "How much more damaging is the reaction than what provoked it?" Replace that with our context. How much more costly are the consequences of a lifetime of over-explaining? The drained confidence, the eroded sense of self, the energy lost to performing acceptability, the relationships weakened by constant justification, than the brief discomfort of simply allowing someone to not fully understand your choices. The discomfort of not explaining lasts a moment. The damage of a lifetime of explaining yourself passes from year to decade. There is a version of your life in which you wake up each morning already certain that you are enough, where you make your choices from a place of peace rather than from panic, where other people's opinions of you are interesting, but not the foundation your entire life is built on. That version of your life is not years away. It does not require the people around you to become different people. It does not require your circumstances to improve or the world to become kinder or safer. It becomes available in the next choice you make. In the next moment, you choose clarity over justification. In the next conversation where you say what you mean and then stop. It begins the moment you decide, my life is not a case to be argued. It is a life to be lived. If something in this video shifted something in you, close it with this. I stopped explaining. I started living. Let's run through all 10 lessons one final time. Lesson 1. You never signed a contract. Your inner world belongs to you. Protect it the way the Stoics protected theirs. Lesson 2. Over-explaining is a nervous system response, not a personality trait. And understanding the origin is how the pattern actually changes. Lesson 3. The more you explain, the less people trust you. Economy of language is authority. Lesson 4. The people who constantly need you to explain yourself are reflecting a trust deficit, either in the relationship or in the image you have of yourself. Lesson 5. Silence is an instrument. The 3-second pause changes every high-stakes conversation. Lesson 6. Stop defending in conflict. Absorb first. Respond from groundedness, not from reactivity. Lesson 7. Use the CAP framework. Claim first. Minimal anchor. Period. Lesson 8. there is a difference between explaining and communicating. One serves connection, one serves fear. Lesson 9. Your identity is not public property. Small, unexplained decisions rebuild self-trust one at a time. Lesson 10. The life that opens on the other side of this, more creative output, deeper relationships, cleaner choices, real dignity, begins now. If this landed for you, hit the like button right now. It tells the algorithm this content deserves to reach more people who need it, and it directly supports Stoic Zeno in continuing to produce work at this depth. Subscribe if you haven't already. Every week on this channel, we go this deep into the philosophy of inner authority, personal power, and the psychology of how to actually live. Drop a comment right now. Which lesson hit you hardest? Was it Lesson 2, the nervous system piece? Lesson 6, the absorption principle? The CAP framework? The identity section in Lesson 9? Tell me in the comments. Your answer shapes exactly what comes next. And it might be precisely what someone else watching today needs to read. I read every single one. Now go make a decision, a real one, a true one, and don't explain it to anyone. Notice how that feels. I'll see you in the next one. My life speaks. I don't owe it a subtitle.